Out there, between the stars, empires rise and fall on the edge of a blade, the flash of plasma, or the cold calculus of survival. And sometimes, the most dangerous weapon isn't a dreadnought bristling with cannons. It's mercy wrapped in white hull plating. The Krell Dominion thought they understood war. They'd crushed a dozen species, burned worlds to ash, and rewritten galactic law with blood and fire. So when their scouts spotted the Sanctuary Dawn, a human hospital ship, unarmed, unshielded, drifting near the shattered ruins of the Cygnus front, they didn't hesitate. They boarded it like thieves in the night. They expected doctors, nurses, wounded civilians, easy captives. What they found were ghosts. Men and women who'd walked through hell on Proxima Theta, who'd held the line at Epsilon Drift while orbital strikes turned the sky into molten rain, who'd been declared dead by their own command and never bothered to lie down. The Krell came for a prize. They left in body bags, if they left at all. This is not a story about heroes. It's about what happens when you mistake compassion for weakness and wake up staring down the barrel of a veteran who's already buried everyone he ever loved. The Sanctuary Dawn drifted in the debris field of what used to be the Cygnus Relay, a critical jump nexus now reduced to twisted metal and frozen corpses. Its hull gleamed white under the distant glare of a dying red star, untouched by weapon scars, pristine in its neutrality. According to every treaty signed since the First Contact Accords, it was sacrosanct, a floating sanctuary. No weapons, no military personnel, just medics, surgeons, and the broken bodies of war's aftermath. But treaties mean nothing to the Krell. Their boarding pod struck the lower medical bay like meteorites, silent, brutal, efficient. Magnetic clamps locked onto the outer airlock, plasma cutters flared to life, and within 90 seconds, the first Krell shock troopers poured inside. 7 feet tall, armored in chitinous black carapace, their multi-jointed limbs ending in vibroclaws that hummed with lethal energy. Their leader, Commander Vractol, stepped through the breach with the arrogance of a predator entering an empty coop. "Secure the bridge," he hissed through his respirator, voice distorted by translator implants. "Capture all personnel alive. The High Matriarch wants this vessel intact. Human medical tech could be useful." His squad fanned out, pulse rifles sweeping corridors lit only by emergency strips. The ship was eerily quiet. No alarms, no panic shouts, just the low thrum of life support and the occasional drip of coolant from a ruptured pipe. They found a first body in Medbay 3. A human male, mid-50s, balding, wearing faded scrubs. Slumped against a bio bed, eyes closed, a half-empty coffee mug still clutched in his hand. Dead. Heart attack, maybe, or stress. Vractol nudged the corpse with a clawed foot. Pathetic. They let their healers work themselves to death. Further in, they discovered more staff. A woman with gray-streaked hair, slumped over a console. Another man lying on a gurney with an N4 still feeding into his arm. All dead. All peaceful. No signs of struggle. "This ship is a tomb," muttered one trooper. Vractol frowned. "Impossible." Our long-range scans showed active biosigns, dozens of them. Then, they reached Ward 7. The door was sealed. Not locked, just sealed, like someone had welded it shut from the inside. One of the Krell placed a breaching charge. It detonated with a muffled thump. The door slid open. Inside, the lights were off. Only the faint glow of monitoring equipment cast long shadows across rows of occupied beds. But these weren't civilians. These were soldiers. Dozens of them. Men and women in tattered fatigues, some missing limbs, others with cybernetic eyes flickering in the dark. Bandages stained with old blood. Scars that told stories no sane being would want to hear. And every single one of them was awake. Sitting up, watching. At the far end of the ward, an old man in a wheelchair rolled forward. He had one real eye, the other was a milky cataract, and his left arm ended in a stump just below the elbow. But he smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a desperate one. A grin that carried the weight of 1,000 battles. "Evening, boys," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Y'all must be lost." Vractol raised his rifle. "Identify yourself." The old man chuckled. "Name's Elias Crow. Used to be a sergeant major in the 9th Colonial Rangers. Retired, well, sort of." He gestured around. "These folks, same story. Wounded, discharged, left for dead by command after the Battle of Cygnus. They sent us here to die quietly. said we were non-essential assets. He leaned forward, the wheelchair creaking. But, see, the thing about veterans, we don't die quiet. Before Vractol could react, the lights went out completely. Not just dimmed, snuffed. Total darkness. Then came the sounds. A whisper of fabric. The click of a safety disengaging. The soft exhale of someone who'd spent years learning how to move without making a sound. One of the Krell troopers screamed. A wet, gurgling cry that cut off abruptly. Red emergency lights flickered on. 3 Krell were down. Throats slit. Weapons gone. The humans hadn't moved from their beds. Except for one. A woman with a shaved head and a neural port jutting from her temple stood in the center of the room, holding a Krell pulse rifle like she'd been born with it. She ejected the power cell, checked the chamber, then looked at Vractol. You really thought a hospital ship full of ex-soldiers was defenseless? She asked. That's cute. Vractol roared, opening fire. The woman dove behind a biobed as plasma bolts shredded the air. But the other patients? They didn't flinch. They just watched. Calm. Patient. Because they knew what was coming. From the ceiling vents, from under gurneys, from hidden compartments in the walls, more veterans emerged. Some limped. Some dragged oxygen tanks. One crawled on hands and knees, dragging a leg that ended in a prosthetic knee joint. But they moved with terrifying coordination. They'd been planning this since the moment the Krell entered the system. Because the Sanctuary Dawn wasn't just a hospital. It was a trap. And the Krell had walked right into it. Crow wheeled himself to the comms panel on the wall. Tapped a sequence. A low hum filled the ship. Not from engines, but from something deeper. Something buried in the cargo holds. Time to wake the old girl up, he muttered. Deep in the belly of the ship, hidden beneath layers of false bulkheads and medical storage, dormant systems powered online. Armor plates slid into place over viewports. Weapon ports unfolded from the hull like blooming steel flowers. And in the central core, a reactor, long thought to be a standard medical-grade fusion unit, began cycling up to combat levels. The Krell had boarded a wolf in sheep's clothing. And the wolf was very, very hungry. Commander Vractol's mind raced faster than his pulse. This wasn't possible. Human hospital ships were stripped of all offensive capability by interstellar law. Their reactors couldn't sustain weapons fire. Their hulls were paper-thin. Yet here he stood, surrounded by crippled warriors who moved like ghosts and fought like demons. He barked orders. Fall back to the breach point. Seal the corridor. But it was too late. The doors behind them slammed shut, magnetically locked from the bridge. The ventilation shafts hissed as neuroinhibitor gas flooded the hallways. Not lethal, just enough to slow reflexes, blur vision. Standard Krell interrogation protocol, now turned against them. One of his troopers collapsed, twitching. Another fired wildly at shadows, hitting nothing but bulkheads. From the darkness, a voice echoed. Calm, almost bored. You used this gas on prisoners at Helios Prime, it said. Remember? You called it truth mist. Made folks talk till their brains fried. Vractol spun, rifle raised. Who said that? A figure stepped into the dim red light. Tall, lean, face half covered by a respirator mask salvaged from a battlefield medkit. One arm was mechanical, crude, jury-rigged, but functional. In his hand, he held a monomolecular scalpel, usually used for delicate surgeries. Now it gleamed like a dagger. Name's Doc Harlan, the man said. I was the one who treated your prisoners after you finished with them. Saw what your truth mist did to their synapses. Figured I'd return the favor. He lunged, not with brute force, with precision. The scalpel sliced through the joint seal of a Krell's armor at the neck. Black ichor sprayed. The trooper choked, claws flailing, before collapsing. Vractol fired. Plasma bolts seared the wall where Harlan had stood a second before. The doctor was already gone, melting back into the shadows. This wasn't a fight. It was a lesson. And the Krell were failing badly. Meanwhile, on the bridge, what the humans still called the command deck, though it bore little resemblance to a standard warship's nerve center. Elias Crow sat in the captain's chair, patched into the ship's neural interface via a spinal jack wired directly into his vertebrae. Wires snaked from his neck to the console, feeding his thoughts into the Sanctuary Dawn's awakening systems. Systems nominal, whispered a voice beside him. It was Lieutenant Mara Chun, former pilot of the UNS Iron Resolve, now blind from a plasma burn, but able to see ship schematics through direct neural feed. Weapons online. Point defense turrets active. Hull integrity at 87%. We can take hits. Crow grunted. Good, because they're going to call for backup. He was right. Outside, the Krell frigate scourge of Vex hovered like a vulture, waiting for confirmation that the hospital ship was secure. When comms went dark, Captain Zorlak grew suspicious. Boarding team, report, he growled into the comm static. Then, a human voice crackled over the channel, calm, almost cheerful. Sorry, pal. Your boys are indisposed. Say, you wouldn't happen to have any spare oxygen tanks on board, would you? Ours are running low. Zorlak's mandibles clicked in fury. Open fire. Disable their engines. Plasma cannons roared. But the Sanctuary Dawn didn't explode. Instead, its hull shimmered as newly activated kinetic barriers flared to life, absorbing the blast. The ship rotated smoothly, presenting its broadside. From hidden launch bays along the medical bay corridors, drone pods ejected, small, fast, armed with EMP charges and micromissiles. They swarmed the scourge of Vex like angry hornets. Impossible. Zorlak roared. That's a hospital. Ain't no such thing as a defenseless ship when veterans are aboard, came the reply. Back inside, the last of the Krell boarding party was cornered in Hydroponics Bay 4. 6 survivors, backs to the wall, surrounded by men and women who should have been too broken to stand. Among them was Private Jax Rourke, leg amputated below the knee, fitted with a cheap prosthetic from salvage. He leaned against a hydroponic rack, breathing hard, but his aim was steady. In his hands, a modified bone saw, rewired to deliver a 1,000,000-volt shock. You know what we called you guys during the Cygnus campaign? Jax asked, voice hoarse. The butchers. You didn't take prisoners. You harvested organs. Said human tissue was nutrient-rich. You took a step forward. My sister was on Helios Prime. You took her eyes, so they make good augments for your elites. The Krell shifted nervously. Jax smiled. Don't worry. I'm not going to kill you. He raised the bone saw. I'm going to make you wish I had. What followed wasn't pretty, but it was necessary, because out here, in the black, mercy is a luxury. And justice? Justice is what you carve with your own 2 hands. By the time the last Krell fell, the Sanctuary Dawn was fully operational. Shields humming, weapons charged, engines purring like a beast finally, uncaged. Crow disconnected from the neural link, sweat pouring down his face. All right, he said, voice weak but firm. Now we hunt. Because the Krell wouldn't stop with 1 ship. They'd send more. A fleet, maybe. And if the Sanctuary Dawn stayed here, they'd be overwhelmed. But if they struck first, if they made the Krell afraid of white-hulled ships, then maybe, just maybe, they could buy the galaxy sometime. Mara Chun tapped commands into the NAV console with trembling fingers. About a fix on their nearest forward base. Vex 7. Supplies, fuel, command hub. Crow nodded. Set course. And patch me through to all decks. A moment later, his voice echoed through every corridor, every ward, every hidden compartment where a veteran waited. This is Crow. We've been written off. Forgotten. Left to rot. But today we remind the galaxy what happens when you piss off a bunch of old soldiers with nothing left to lose. A chorus of cheers, hoarse, pained, but fierce, rose through the ship. The Sanctuary Dawn turned toward the stars. Not as a hospital, but as a warship reborn. And the Krell? They had no idea what was coming. The journey to Vex 7 took 12 hours. 12 hours of tense silence, constant system checks, and whispered conversations in the dark. The veterans didn't sleep. They couldn't. Every creak of the hull, every fluctuation in power, sent adrenaline spiking through veins already worn thin by years of combat stress. But they didn't complain. They just prepared. In engineering, a former demolitions expert named Rico Boom Boom Alvarez jury-rigged the ship's medical nanite dispensers into swarm drones capable of eating through Krell armor. In the mess hall, cooks repurposed nutrient paste injectors into pressurized toxin sprayers filled with a cocktail of sedatives and nerve agents. Even the chaplain, a wiry old padre named O'Malley, was busy blessing grenades and etching scripture on his shrapnel casings. We may be sinners, he muttered, but tonight we're God's blunt instrument. On the bridge, Crow studied the tactical display. Vex 7 wasn't just a supply depot, it was a fortress. Orbital defenses, patrol drones, a garrison of 500 elite Krell warriors. And, worse, intelligence suggested they were experimenting on human prisoners, trying to reverse engineer Terran resilience. They're dissecting our people, Mara Chun said, her blind eyes fixed on nothing, trying to figure out why we keep fighting even when we're half dead. Crow's jaw tightened. Then, we give him a live demo. The plan was insane. Suicidal, even. They'd approach under cloak, using the Sanctuary Dawn's new stealth protocols, which rerouted power from non-essentials to dampen thermal and EM signatures. Once in range, they deploy boarding pods disguised as medical waste canisters. Inside each pod, 6 veterans, armed with whatever they could scavenge or build. Their goal wasn't to capture the base. It was to burn it to the ground. As the ship dropped out of warp near Vex 7's orbit, the veterans suited up, not in standard armor. Most of it had been stripped during their retirement, but in patched-up fatigues, scavenged Krell plating, and makeshift shields made from biobed frames. Jax Rourke adjusted his prosthetic, wincing as the socket rubbed raw skin. "You sure about this, Sarge?" Crow handed him a pulse pistol taken from a dead Krell. "You ever back down from fight, son?" Jax grinned. "Hit no. Then, shut up and load your damn gun." The drop began. 20 pods launched silently from the Sanctuary Dawn's underbelly, tumbling toward the station like discarded trash. Krell sensors ignored them, just more human refuse. But inside each pod, hearts pounded with grim resolve. The landing was rough. One pod overshot, crashing into a fuel silo and detonating in a fireball that lit up the entire docking ring. Alarms blared across Vex 7. Too early. But the veterans didn't panic. They adapted. From the burning wreckage, figures emerged, limping, bleeding, but firing. Pulse rifles barked. Grenades rolled into ventilation shafts. Within minutes, chaos erupted. Inside the main lab complex, Doc Harlan led a team straight to the vivisection wing. What they found turned even hardened soldiers sick. Humans suspended in fluid tanks, organs exposed, neural probes jacked into their spines. Some were still alive, eyes wide with silent terror. Harlan didn't speak. He just set the charges. "Let 'em burn in hell," he whispered. Meanwhile, Crow's team fought their way to the command core. They lost 2 men getting through the security gate. Private Lean shot through the chest, and Corporal Reyes crushed by a collapsing bulkhead. But it didn't stop, because stopping meant letting the Krell win. Again, at the heart of the station, they found the command throne, a grotesque fusion of organic tech and metal, where High Overseer Kthar monitored the experiments. He turned as Crow's group burst in, mandibles flaring in disbelief. "You're supposed to be invalids," he hissed. Crow leveled his rifle. "Yeah, and you're supposed to be smart. Guess we both got bad intel." He pulled the trigger. The fight that followed was brutal, close quarters, desperate. Krell warriors poured in from every corridor. But the veterans used the environment, overloading power conduits, flooding chambers with cryogas, turning the station's own systems against its defenders. And then, the final blow. Mara Chun, still aboard the Sanctuary Dawn, triggered the station's self-destruct sequence remotely, something she'd hacked into during their approach. The countdown began. 3 minutes. "Time to go," Crow yelled. They ran. Through fire, through smoke, through the screams of dying enemies and fallen friends. Pods launched back toward the ship, some overloaded with rescued prisoners, others carrying only corpses wrapped in blankets. The Sanctuary Dawn pulled away just as Vex 7 exploded, a silent bloom of fire in the void, lighting up the faces of the survivors on the observation deck. No cheers this time, just silence. And grief. But also purpose, because they'd struck a blow, not just against the base, but against the myth of Krell invincibility. Word would spread, and next time a Krell commander saw a white-hulled ship drifting alone, he'd think twice. The victory at Vex 7 came at a cost. 23 veterans didn't make it back. Their names were carved into the ship's memorial wall, a simple plaque in the rec room, next to a dented coffee machine and a faded photo of Earth's oceans. But there was no time to mourn. Scans showed Krell reinforcements converging on their position. A full battle group, 3 cruisers, 2 carriers, and a command dreadnought bearing the sigil of the High Matriarch herself. "They know we're a threat now," Mara Chin said, her fingers dancing over the hollow display. "They're not sending scouts. They're sending an execution squad." Crow stared at the incoming fleet data. Odds were impossible. Even with the Sanctuary Dawn's upgrades, they couldn't win a straight fight. But Crow had never fought fair. "We don't need to beat them," he said slowly. "We just need to make them afraid." His plan was audacious. Insane. Beautiful. They'd lure the fleet into the Graveyard Nebula, a dense ion storm field littered with the wrecks of ancient wars. Navigation was nearly impossible. Sensors scrambled, perfect for ambush. But to draw the Krell in, they needed bait. Themselves. The Sanctuary Dawn broadcast a distress signal on all human emergency channels. Fake, of course, claiming critical damage, life support failing, survivor stranded. Then they powered down everything except minimal life support and hid among the derelicts. For 2 days, they waited, floating in darkness, listening to their own breaths, wondering if this was where it ended. Then, the Krell arrived. The dreadnought maw of the matriarch led the formation, flanked by cruisers bristling with weapons. They scanned the nebula, cautious now. Burn once, twice shy. But the distress signal was too tempting, too human. They sent in hunter-killer drones. The veterans watched from the shadows as the drones swept past, scanning wrecks, probing for heat signatures. One passed within 50 meters of the Sanctuary Dawn. Inside, every heart stopped. But the ship's thermal masking held. Then, contact. A drone pinged their hull. Alarms blared silently on the bridge. "They've got us," Mara whispered. Crow didn't flinch. Not yet. He tapped the command. From hidden compartments, the Sanctuary Dawn released dozens of decoy buoys, miniature drones mimicking human biosigns, broadcasting fake comms chatter, even simulating the sound of coughing and crying. The Krell took the bait. Drones diverted. Ships adjusted course. And in that moment of distraction, Crow gave the order. "All units, activate." Across the nebula, dormant wrecks came alive. Because the veterans hadn't just been hiding. They'd been preparing. Over the past 48 hours, boarding teams had slipped out in stealth suits, planting charges, hacking derelict AI cores, turning ancient war machines into puppets. Now those puppets rose. A Terran destroyer from the Titan War, long thought scrap, powered up its engines and rammed a Krell cruiser. A Xylosian freighter, retrofitted with stolen Krell plasma turrets, opened fire from the blind spot of the dreadnought. Even a gutted mining rig, jury-rigged with railgun coils, launched slugs the size of small cars into the enemy formation. Chaos erupted. The Krell, expecting a single crippled ship, found themselves surrounded by ghosts of wars past, all controlled by the minds of the Sanctuary Dawn's crew via neural uplinks. Doc Harlan coordinated the drone swarm from Med Bay, his mind split across dozens of vessels. Jax Rourke piloted a salvage fighter with his prosthetic wired directly into the controls. Even Padre O'Malley manned a turret on a reactivated gunboat, muttering prayers between bursts of fire. And Crow? He stood at the heart of it all, directing the symphony of destruction like a conductor. The maw of the matriarch tried to retreat, but the nebula's ion storm scrambled its jump drive. Trapped. One by one, the Krell ships fell. Not to superior firepower, but to cunning. To sacrifice. To the kind of warfare that only those who've seen the worst of war can wage. When it was over, the nebula was silent again. But the message was clear. The humans weren't done. And their hospitals? They weren't sanctuaries. They were arsenals. News of the Krell defeat at the Graveyard Nebula spread like wildfire across the galactic networks. Species that had bowed to the Dominion for decades began whispering of rebellion. Smugglers carried tales of a white ship crewed by ghosts who turned mercy into vengeance. Even neutral factions started arming their medical vessels, just in case. But aboard the Sanctuary Dawn, there was no celebration. They were exhausted, broken, running on fumes and spite. Crow sat alone in the memorial room, staring at the latest name added to the wall. Sergeant Anya Petrov died securing the aft reactor during the Nebula engagement. She'd been 24. Lost both legs on Proxima Theta. Volunteered for the mission anyway. He poured 2 cups of coffee. One for himself, one for the ghost. "We did good, kid," he murmured. Then the alert came. Mara's voice, tight with urgency. "Sarge, you need to see this." On the main viewer, a massive fleet emerged from warp. Not Krell. Human. The United Terran Alliance. Flagship, UNS Sovereign Will. Admiral Cale Vance, Crow's former CEO, the man who'd signed their discharge papers, stood on the view screen, face grim. "Sanctuary Dawn, this is Admiral Vance. Stand down and prepare to be boarded. By order of the Terran High Command, you are hereby charged with unauthorized militarization of a protected vessel, violation of the Geneva Accords, and acts of unsanctioned warfare." Crow didn't flinch. Funny. Last I checked, the Krell weren't signatories to the Geneva Accords. Neither were the things that ate Mars. Vance's jaw tightened. You've made a mess, Elias. The Krell are demanding your heads. The Senate's panicking. They want this contained. Contained? Crow laughed bitterly. While you lot were signing treaties, we were burying our friends. While you were debating ethics, we were fighting for survival. And now you show up to arrest us? He leaned closer to the pickup. Go ahead. Send your Marines. See how many come back. Silence. Then Vance sighed. I'm not here to fight you, Elias. I'm here to offer you a deal. He paused. The Krell are massing for a final push on Sol. They've broken through the Orion line. Earth's defenses are stretched thin. We need every ship, every soldier. His eyes met Crow's through the screen. We need you. Crow looked around the bridge, at Mara, at Jax, at Doc Harlan limping in from Med Bay, at Padre O'Malley clutching a rosary made of bullet casings. They were tired, wounded, half dead, but they were ready. Tell me, Admiral, Crow said slowly, if we say yes, do we get to keep the ship? Vance almost smiled. Consider it your commission. And so, the Sanctuary Dawn, once a symbol of peace, now a legend of war, turned its prow toward home. Not as outcasts, but as guardians. Because in the end, humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its fleets or its tech. It was its refusal to stay down. Even when the galaxy wrote you off as broken, you could still rise, and fight, and win. The white ship sailed on, carrying ghosts, and hope.